Hi everyone, this is Jordan Goldmeier here. So I actually have had to re-record the webinar, and the reason I had to re-record the webinar is that our software, that we've been relying on for years, is just not really cutting it anymore when it comes to video streams. So if you watch the webinar, you probably saw the video cutting in and out, and even happened on our final version. And in addition to that, uh, the sound came in all right. So it's kind of hard to follow. I'm going to re-record the whole thing. I really didn't anticipate on re-recording the whole thing, so I'm going to do this without cuts. So I'm just going to go and do it. I think you guys get to see me uncut. You get to see me raw and unfiltered, as it were. So just a few things before I go forward. I've been working on a course for H&M, the clothing company. So they have a 4-day analytics course that they have with me, which covers Excel, Power BI, and R. And so if you work for H&M, please sign up for that. Also, I know I talked to you about it over email. If you're interested in bringing it to your organization, just let me know. You can just write to me, jordan@excel.tv. Okay, so the files for this, if you want to get the files, they're going to be in the comments. So just scroll down, or I say comments, the video description. They're going to be in the video description down below this video. So go ahead and click on that. So there's going to be 2 extra things I'm going to throw in there. I'm showing you one of them. This actually is not, I'm not going to present how to do it on this one, how to build this here. But I just want to show you some of the cool stuff you can do in Excel. Let me see if I can just highlight this whole thing. And it looks like it's working now. I guess the years are too far down. So basically what this does is it's kind of like that stock chart that Yahoo Finance used to have. And as you change the timeline up here, it's going to change the timeline down below. And this is going to highlight what it's pulling from. And here's the larger one. So I'm going to include that. That's just kind of a bonus. I'll explain how to do it in another video. And the other thing I've been working on, let's see here. This is inspired by Facebook. So if you have a Facebook page, you can figure out when most of the people are going to be on, and I'll throw this in here, and I'm not going to explain how to do this one today, but you can go ahead and take a look and see if you can figure it out on your own. So these were going to be videos I was going to do later, so I'm just going to throw them in now, just kind of as an apology for the webinar, but feel free to download these, and I'll have descriptions on how to do them at a later date. Okay, so let's start out. If you've seen my work before, you've probably seen versions of this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk to you like, look, there's the name of this webinar was how to quickly create visual analytics. Many of these webinars that are similar often like they employ VBA or they employ Power BI. Some of the stuff that we can do here, you probably could do in Power BI, but what you'll see is the precision we get in Excel is still much better. And for me, I just kind of think it's a lost art. It really is a matter, if you're wondering when should I use what, it's really just a matter of time and audience. How much time do you have to put it together? Obviously, Power BI, if you don't need the kind of specialization we're doing here, it has a lot of advantages. But it's also very worth it if you're going to do Power BI, that is. If you're going to do data prep work. If you have something small like this, as many of us still work in the realm of small data, if it's small like this, well, then Excel is probably a good way to go. So here I have my data set right here. Like I said, it's very small. I have a chart lookup over here. You can see as I change this, it's going to change this chart over here. So how do I build this? I'm going to build this super quick. This is what's really cool about still doing things in Excel. So I'm going to call this selected person right here. And if I want to create that drop down like I did before, I will go to, with cell B9 highlighted, I'll go to data. I'll click data validation. And then I will click list. And then under the source, I can go from B3 to B6. I'll hit OK on that. So you can see it's working. It's pulling the different names. Okay. So if I want to pull down the associated series here, I think the way that we would really do this, most of us would think VLOOKUP. And, I don't want to get into the VLOOKUP index match debate. Someone asked me, what do I think about it? What do I, do I really think one is better than the other? I just don't really care. There's speed advantages to index match. If you, upon testing, find that that's the better way to go, then that is the way that you should go. If you're doing something like this, where you are matching the left side of a table, like a key, you're matching a key, and you're pulling something out to the right of it, I think VLOOKUP is the way to go semantically, because we know what it does, right? Index match can go on any column, but VLOOKUP always has a way of looking at from the left and pulling from the right. So that's the way I think about it. Just a way to encode what your variables, or excuse me, what your functions do, a way to think about it. This problem naturally lends itself to VLOOKUP. Okay, so first argument, right, we have the lookup value. Second argument, we have the table array. If I want to pull north here, right, we have 5 columns. Remember, the one to the right of the first one is always the second, because it always starts at 1. So if I wanted to pull north, and I would make this a false approximate match. So I'm also a big fan of using the false here. So instead of the 0 or the 1, because approximate match, it's like it's asking me a question, right? True or false? I say false. So, okay, so I'm going to hit OK on that. And if I wanted to pull all of these back, I could, create a mechanism that would pull 2, 3, 4, 5. But actually, I'm going to pull it back in one fell swoop. Now, this is becoming less, using dynamic arrays, it's becoming less and less of an issue. And again, it's its own lost art, because there's these new unique formulas in Excel. I don't teach them yet because not everyone has them. So until everyone has them, I don't really feel right giving something that's only to some of the audiences. So I'm still teaching this the old way. So if I want to pull back 4 items, I'll put a 2, 3, 4, 5 in there. I'm going to hit enter like that. So you might be wondering, well, what the heck did that do? If I want to pull back 4 items, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight now 4 cells. I'm going to go in here and hit Control-Shift-Enter. So there's really a 3-step process to creating an array formula. Let's run through it again, right? So we're going to start right here. The first step is to create the right formula. The second step is to highlight out to the size of what you want to return. So I'll hit Control-Shift-Enter here. You see that it pulled that back. And then step 3, which I just went through very quickly, was Control-Shift-Enter. And whenever you do this, it's always a good idea to test. So we're going to change this to April, Sarah, and so forth. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to insert a new 2D column. So I did that really quickly. I'm just going to do this. Insert right here, 2D column, like that. I'm going to right-click it. I'm going to click Select Data. I'm going to click Add here. Series name, we can just link it right here. Series values. Now look, anytime you deal with something like this and it has equals curly bracket 1 curly bracket, we don't really like that. So watch what happens if I forget to delete this. I'm going to click here, and now you got this stupid plus, and then you click off of it, and Excel's like, what the heck? Like, I don't want that. So do yourself a favor. Whatever's in here, just go ahead and hit delete right out the gate when you make it, because you're going to ask for a world of headaches. And if you're wondering why curly bracket 1 curly bracket, well, think about the array formula, right? It's just creating a set of 1, because it can't value nothing. So that's just kind of how it thinks. So series values, we're going to grab these right here, C9 through F9. Now, you may be tempted to hit OK here, but we're not going to do that, because that 1 through 4 down here, that's so tacky. It's just tacky. So C2 through F2 is going to be our new label range. We'll hit OK. Okay, so we built that. We're not very far in. So look, check this out. We change it to April. We change it to Mark, to Jeremy. Okay, so that's cool. What about, let's see here. I'm going to start with cell B11, max value here. Here's what I'm going to do. So I should say we were done with that, right? But what if I wanted to always highlight the top value? Wouldn't that be cool? Okay, so we can do that. Here's how we're going to do it. In cell C11, I'm going to type in max, highlight this set of data right here. I'll go ahead and click OK. So that's 893 there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this parallel series. And I want to make sure, sorry if it sounds like I'm hitting the mic here. I'm just trying to get these wires out of the way. Okay, so that should be a little better. So max value series, I'm going to call this that. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to test whether this value equals this value. So you see that it came back as a false, right? So in Excel, ones and zeros, trues and falses. They work respectively that way. So if we have a false, we can treat it like a 0. If we have a true, we can treat it like a 1. So if I wanted to drag this across, right, and I want to test if it equals this value, and if it does equal that value, I want it to return the value. But otherwise, I want it to return a 0. I could just set up something like this, right? Because this is either going to evaluate to true or false, which is either going to be multiplied, which is 1 or 0, going to be multiplied by one of these numbers here. So I'll hit OK, drag that to the right. Take a look at this. It didn't work. So why didn't it work? Let's just take a look here. So it looks like it did not work because I had my my locks. So if I say I'm going to lock it in, that means I'm going to just create an absolute reference to it. So you might hear me say, oh, I'm going to lock it in. So let's do that. Okay, so look, 777 appears, but still that's not exactly what we want here. And I think that that is because that this one should not have been locked as well. So let's just do that. Third time's the charm. Drag it across. There we go. Okay, so there's still something, it's still off, right? Because if I look at this, 647 isn't correct. So let's just take a look at this one, this next one right here. Ah, I see. You know what? In cases like this, sometimes it's easier to start over. Sadly, that will not be cut. You are watching that right now. So we're going to test if this equals this. We'll lock that in. I'm going to close that parenthesis, and then we are going to multiply it by that number. So I think this should work. This doesn't work. Oh, I'm just going to yell, oh, I give up. No, it works. See? Isn't that great? So the next thing we want to do, we have 0, then we have the highest value, then 0, 0, right? That's always going to be true. If I go back up here, we're on Jeremy right now, go back up here and I make this 1200 like that, you see it automatically updates. I'm going to hit Control Z on that for now. I'm going to highlight B12 through F12 like that. Check this out. We're going to hit Control C. That copies it. We're going to click into this chart, Control V to paste it. Okay, so you're looking at this and you're like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I see what the tallest one is, but it's not really highlighting it. So how do we get that highlight trick going? I'll right-click on this orange one right here, and let's pull out, I guess it came out on its own. So if I take that gap width, and we're going to leave it there for a second. I actually meant to do series overlap. If I cover that series overlap like that, it's going to overlap the series. And so the effect is to always highlight the top value. And we can actually see this in action. I'm going to change this to mark. Right here, you see it highlighted the west. Now what's cool here, what's cool is that this is very living. So if I change this to 1200, you see it automatically changes. So very much a set it and forget it approach. One thing that's missing now is that we had a chart title, right? The chart title connected to cell B9. And so as I changed B9, it would change the chart title. So how do we get that back? I'm going to click in here. I'm going to go to Format. No, wait. I'm going to go to Chart Design. I'm going to go to Add Chart Element. And I am going to select Chart Title. So we put that above, like so. I'm just going to put this over on the right. I like it better over here. So one thing I can do now that I've moved this over, go up to the formula bar. I'm going to type in equals like that, and then I'm going to select cell B9. So I'm going to select it like it's a cell. I'll hit OK, and now look, it's connected. Isn't that cool? All right, so let's do some finishing touches here. I can't deal with these lines, so they're gone. Goodbye, lines. Let's give this like a nice outside border. I don't think that this thing needs a border, so I'm going to hit no outline on that. And then what I don't like is Excel puts like a border around the chart, but I like that to be more free-flowing. So I'm going to go here and click Shape Outline, nothing. So this is how I would design a chart. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make this kind of have a shared color here. So I like the idea that it's a different shade, right? Because this makes the, from a data visualization perspective, we are implying, right, that these colors are related. So even though they are independent, they are related categorical data. So just using color in that way helps us identify that. And now take a look. You can see that it works really well. And the other thing is, like, this doesn't have to be over here, right? We can move this over here if we wanted. I've seen some people put user forms, or excuse me, not a user form. They put I'm going to go to the developer tab. They put one of these guys, a drop down from the top. So they might do a form control that does a drop down. So that's something that's really cool. Look, we did that without any VBA. We did it very, very quickly. Very easy example. Next one I'm going to show you, I did a video on this recently, but what's cool is there's new data, so we can actually use that new data and see if there are any changes. So I built this chart that shows President Donald Trump's approval and disapproval ratings, and I use Power Query for it. So if you like Power Query and you want to impress some folks in your office, here's something really cool to do, although I don't know if you should mix politics at your office. I debated even using it for this, but the thing is that when it comes to data, there's nothing like politics, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm going to go to polling report right here, and I'm going to close this guy. See, even yeah, I can't even edit that out. Okay, so what I'll go here is I went to polling report. This is where I like to pull data from. I'm going to go to President Trump here. Then I'm going to go to job ratings like that. So we have approve or disapprove. So here's what's really cool with Power Query. I have this URL right here. I went up here. I hit Control C to copy it. I'm going to go over here. Let's make a new workbook. And I'm just going to close this one right now. We don't need to save. I already have it saved. Okay, so I made a new workbook. I'm going to go to data over here. We are going to click from web in that get and transform group right here, also known as ding, 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 Power Query. So we're going to click on that from web. I'm going to hit Control V and paste that in there. And we'll hit OK on that. So it's going to pull that. It's going to go and analyze that website, look for any tables, take a look at this. It did find a table, the one we're interested in. We can always look at the web view. Let's see here, table height, because this uses, oh, I see, okay. So for a new page, it could do table highlighting, but since this is kind of an older site, it won't do that. But just to show you here that it did kind of pick it up. So we'll go back to table view. You can see that information is here. I'm going to go ahead and click transform data because that's what I want to do with it. Okay, so I'm going to take this and make it into a usable table. I don't really care about, let's hit refresh on that. Why not? Why would we ever want to use old data? I mean, come on. Okay, so we have, let's remember this. This is approve and this is disapprove because we're going to change these columns in a second. I'm going to knock out this column right here. I don't really care for it. I don't care for this column either. I don't know what its deal is. And this delta, we're not going to use it. So I'm going to knock that one out. So now we have these two things left. So actually what I'll do is I will remove, let's remove this top row right here. This top one right here. I did this a little bit different than I typically do. So we're going to remove the top one right there. And then what we can do is we can click use first rows as headers. That gets us our approve and disapprove. And then I think we still want to remove this top row right here. Like that. Okay, and then we'll do a little cleaning up here. I'm going to call this poll. And then over here, this is our date. You know, the thing is, I'm going to do some work on this column, so I don't really care to change it. It doesn't need to be changed right now. So I'm going to click on this column. I'm going to go to transform. I'm going to click extract. And then I'm going to do text before the delimiter. So we'll do a 7, or excuse me, a slash, right? Because what I want to do is we have to make some choices. So as you look at this, you see it's like a series of dates, right? So this one says Gallup, this poll was July 1st through the 12th, 2019. Okay, so when making the comparison of the results, what does that mean? We could take it at the end of the month. We could take it at the beginning of the month. You know, there's a lot of choices here. How we plot it. I'm going to make the assumption, just for the ease of doing this, that the month in which the first date in which it was taken is going to set the month in which we are going to categorize it was taken. So what I'm going to do is sort of flatten everything down to a month and a year. So you may be looking at that and saying, that's not great methodology. And, you know, You might be right on that, but we're going to use it for this one. But it's always important when you're doing this kind of work because we always think, data is data. But there's underlying assumptions being made here, and that's going to affect how it's displayed. So I'll hit OK on that. I extracted it, but I'm going to take this off. Let's see here. I'm going to, under my advanced options, I extracted this, but I didn't want it to replace it. So let's hit X on that. So let me see here. We can hit extract for the delimiter. Someone out there probably knows what I'm doing wrong here. So sometimes when I extract, we create a new column, and sometimes not. Let's see here. If I right click here and I want to pull, I don't know. Let's see. I'm just going to click this one. Let's see if I hit extract and if it does it the same thing. Let's test it. Okay, it looks like it replaced the column. I don't want it to replace the column. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this column. Sometimes it doesn't replace it though. So again, this sort of stuff that you hear in here, this is the kind of stuff I edit out and I usually figure out before I jump on. So I'm going to click text before delimiter on this one. So we'll do a slash here, hit OK, and then I want to get that 19 out there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click extract, text after delimiter. I'll hit 19, and then check this out. What I want this to do under advanced options is to start from the end of the input. So I don't need that 19 right there. I'll go ahead and hit OK, like that. And then what I am going to do here is, we'll just call this real quick, month number, year, and I kind of want to make a final date. So I'm going to click add column here. I see why. So here's the difference, okay? If you're wondering, I said sometimes it adds a column, sometimes it doesn't. So I pulled it from the transform tab. So when you transform a column, you're going to do that work on the column. Versus when you add a column, you can also extract, and that's going to add one. That's the way I would have done it if I wasn't at this point. But, we are where we are. So I could create a custom column right here that can merge these two, right? Or alternatively, what I could do is I could highlight these right here. And if I did a merge column here, it's going to add one. If I go to transform and I hit merge columns, it's just going to combine it. So let's click custom on this. I'm just going to let it combine it. And I'm going to change this to /20. So what it's going to do is it's going to be like 7/20 and 19. 7/20, 19. So we'll call that date. I'll go ahead and click OK on that. So let's see what happened here. So we added the /20 on there, and it didn't do exactly what I would have liked. So let me let's go back one. So we have 7 and 19. Let's try this again. Merge columns, and we're gonna do a custom separator. I'm gonna do a /20 right there, and I'm gonna type in date. We'll hit OK. Okay, now look at that. That looks a lot better. All right, so we have the date column right here, and I don't think Excel knows that this is a date yet, so, or Power Query as the case may be. I'm going to go back to the Home tab. I'm going to go here where it says text. I'll click date like that. Also, an easy way to do this, if you don't want to go back to the Home tabs, you can just go here and click one of these. We're going to make this a whole number like that. We're going to make this one a whole number as well, and then I think it looks good. So what we can do is we'll hit close and load too. So to create the presidential dashboard as we had it before, so I just want to show you this real quick. So to create this, we really needed two data sets. So there's one data set that represents the backend data. So that's 2 series, and that's always static. And then there's always a changing one, right, that represents the sliced values. And that's what we see changed on top of that. So let's go ahead and build this. We have this right here. We're going to call this dynamic data like that. I'm going to create a new sheet here, static data. Now, when I originally posted this online, someone said there was an easier way to do this, what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to hit Control-C. I'm going to highlight this whole table, and then under the paste, let's just do a paste values option because I don't want it to create another table. Also over here on our query, this shouldn't matter now because it's called, table 0, but I want to rename that to polling report data, just so we can be good tenants of data. Okay, so I pasted this static data over here. Now, if I wanted to, I could turn this into a table. Let's just go ahead and do that. I'll hit Control T. My table has headers. It most certainly does. So we'll call this static data like that. And I'm going to get rid of the banded rows because I hate them. And the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new worksheet tab. I'm going to call that dashboard. And then I'm going to go to insert. I'm going to click scatter plot like that. Excuse me. I'm going to draw it out. I'm going to right click and go to select data. We're going to add some series X values. These are going to be our static ones. So our X is going to be the date. Control Shift down. Series Y values. Remember, if we ever have that equals curly bracket 1 curly bracket, it's like the bane of our existence. So we're going to go in there and hit delete. And the next thing I'm going to add is that one right next to it, series Y values. Remember, we're going to delete that. Again, I'm going to do this in reverse order. So we'll add the disapprove there. And then the X values are going to be our date. And this should be disapprove. But I actually am going to rename that because I think we're going to call it static.disapprove like that. And I am going to get rid of this equals here. So we'll hit that. And then series 1, I'm going to call that static dot approve. And now I'm looking at this chart and it doesn't really like, let's see here, we got our X's right, we got our Y's right. So this is starting at B1. So let's just make sure that these line up. All right, I'm going to go to this one here and let's see what's going on here. We're going to remove these ones here. So, okay, so that looks a lot better, right? And then what I'm going to do here is let's make this guy a date. Okay, let's make it a date. That's exactly what we should be doing and not using these numbers. So I don't really like how this is scaled right now. So let's see here. We see the top goes up to like 65 and the bottom goes to 30. So I'm going to go to format axis. Here where it says minimum, we're going to make that we're going to make that 30. And then where it says maximum, we're going to make that 65. And we're going to make sure that that always locks in. And then the next thing is we have a lot of extra date space here that I don't really need. So let's get the minimum and the maximum of the date. If I go here to my static data, Control Shift down like this, if you don't have these things showing down below, average count, numerical count, all that, you can right click and just add them. I like to do it like this, highlight this whole thing. I see that the minimum is January 1st, 2017, and the maximum is July 1st, 2019. So I'll click down here under our minimum maximum bounds. We can make this 1/2017. You can just type it in like that. Go ahead and hit enter, and then under the maximum bounds, we will go make this one also locked in like that. And we like this. This looks good. Let's go ahead and delete some of these things that we don't really need. So I don't need these grid lines here. I find them to be kind of cumbersome and in the way, And then I like when everything, like I said, I like it when the entirety of the border is contiguous or continuous around my chart. So what I like to do when I do that is I turn off the border from my other axes so that they are naked, as it were. And then I'll go to shape outline and add this light gray in. So, okay, so I like that. I really hate, I'm going to put this up here. I really hate this border. It drives me nuts. So I'm going to go here where it says format, shape outline. We're going to get rid of that border. Okay, so let's make this a little bit bigger. Do a little bit of layout. And, I just have to do it. I have to do it. All right. So we did that bit of layout. So what we need to do here is we have our static background. We're going to make these data points, we're going to like imply that they're a background by making them gray, bordered with nothing in them. So I'm going to go click Format Selection. I don't really love how you have to hit Format Selection, and then you got to go over to this paint bucket right here, and then you got to click Marker, and then you got to go Marker Options. You got to click Built In if you want to make them bigger, which we do. So I'll make those, let's make them 7. I like 7. So under Solid Fill, we want to do a no fill like that. And then Solid Line, we want to make it gray. I do like the automatic gray it gave me. Okay, so I'm going to click here. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to make these bigger. How big did I make these? See, I even forget. So we're going to make that a 7. And then no fill like that. And then we're going to make this, we're going to make the border a solid line like that. Okay, so that looks good. That's like right on top of everything. And so, or it's right behind everything. And then we're going to put 2 charts on top of it that represent our dynamic data. So I think this is going to work. Let's see here. I'm going to highlight this here. I'll hit Control C. I'll click over here and hit Control V. It should be right on top of it, just like that. Okay, so I'm going to go, I'm going to do the same thing with this one right here. I'm going to highlight the whole thing, click Control C like that. And so that's right on top in the way that we like it too. And then here, inside here, I'll click Insert. We'll insert a new slicer. Let's click Pull. And I'm just going to hit Control X to take this from this page. Hit Control V here. So if I start slicing on these, we should see them. These ones look like they're much later. Let's see here. So why would it only show those items if we click the whole thing here? Let's see what's going on with that. So I'll click Select Data here. Let's see here. The Approve is right here. So we have our X values right here, and we have our Y values right here. Let's see what happens if we attach these Y values that are over, or these X values that are over here on its own table. We'll hit OK on that. So let's hit Disapprove. Let's just see what happens. Let's see. Control Z here. Let's see. All right, so I pasted these on here, and I'm wondering if I go to Format Axis here, that's all correct. We'll go to Format Axis over here. That's all correct. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Delete on these. Let's see if I can add them in manually. So sometimes that's the best way to go. I'll hit Select Data here. I'm going to click Add. Series X values are going to be our dynamic data over here, like that. Series Y values, we're going to make this one approve like this. I will hit OK after that. See if this gives us, okay, so this looks a lot better. This is what we want to see. Okay, so having done that, I'm going to click off of this. I'm going to click Select Data, and I'm going to add one more series, so series name. We'll fix that in a second, actually. We'll click out of that. So the X values, we're pulling, in this case, from the dynamic data set. That's this one right here. So go all the way down like that. Our Y values are going to be Disapprove over here. Control Shift down. We'll hit OK. So we see, okay, so that's actually what we like to see. So let's highlight everything again. I'm going to click these guys right here. I don't love this marker color, so I'm going to go to Marker Options. We're going to go to, we're going to make these bigger, by the way, just so that they're kind of on top. And under the Fill, we'll click Solid Fill. And I think that we're okay with that. We don't need any line for the border, right? So we'll just make it blue like that. And then I'm going to click down here, and we will make these bigger to 7, as I remember. And then we'll do a Solid Fill. And I don't love that it gave me blue again for a Solid Fill. Let's make that something like an orange that's different. And under border, we'll make that no line. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is, because we put little trend lines on these, which I'm not really sure is actually useful as like an analyst. I think it's kind of a cool thing. I think it could be useful if you really think about if you're trying to analyze how different, or visualize, I should say, the trends of different news organizations, but I'm not really sure that a linear plot is the best way to go. Okay, so once we've done that, I've added this here, and linear plot is like, Excel just hates me, so it picks the wrong color. So we're going to make this the same color as this data here. I think it's this blue right here. And then we're also going to make the line itself not dash. We'll make it solid like that. And then I'll click down here. I'm going to click add trend line again. So I right clicked it, add trend line. Great. See, look, it adds the color that's the opposite of what I just used. Oh, Excel. Okay, so I'm going to click solid line here. And then under this gray, we're going to pick the yellow. And then we can either change the shape outline here or here. You can see that I almost like instinctively, my muscle memory takes me above here. So we'll add that. Okay, so that looks cool. And then there's one last aspect as far as the chart is concerned of the thing that we were visualizing before, right? So that is that right now all the data points are on top of each other. So multiple dates from multiple polls may actually suggest, a certain pattern. And how could we see that that there are multiple dots behind just one of these dots? Because remember, we flattened them by month. So one thing we can do is I've clicked my markers, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. Under the fill, we're going to make the transparency. Let's make it 75 like that. And then I'll click down here. I'm going to make this transparency as well 75. So if it's hotter, as it were, if it has more color there, well, what it's telling us is that multiple polls actually came in with that number on that date. So, when we think of a confidence interval, right, what we're really understanding here is, let's say we're certain, the interval is the range, right, but we're certain at 95% that the data that we're being shown is not itself the result of noise or randomness, right? So it doesn't tell us that the poll is wrong or misleading. It really just means that we accept out in this random universe to a certain tolerable threshold that sometimes our readings may be wrong, right? And so having something like this that shows multiple occurrences under this heat map way could also suggest that maybe there's something to it. Now, all that being said, remember, I flattened the dates. So this is also effective, that flattening the dates, and you can decide for yourself how you want to interpret it. So over here, I have my slicer, so we like how this works here. But one of the problems I have with this slicer right now is that I don't really know how many polls are in one of these selected things, right? Because if there's only one, I don't want to go through all of them. So how could I figure that out? Well, I'm going to start laying this out like a dashboard. I'll go up to View and hit Grid Lines. I'm going to just hit Delete on the chart title there. It's bugging me that it's named Chart Title, but I don't feel like changing it at this step. So over here we have the poll. I want to change this, right? So it tells me how many polls were taken by the one I selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and hit Delete. We'll go back to our polling table that it pulls from, and then over here I'm going to just write I'm going to do poll count like this. This is probably not the most efficient way of doing it, but it does work in a pinch. So what we'll do is we'll do a count if, and our range is going to be this whole poll right there. And then guess what our criteria is going to be, right? It's just going to be the data right here. So this will give us how many of those polls are in the entire data set. And then over here I can say slicer caption, excuse me. And then inside of here, I might just tell myself what it is. So I'll say poll plus poll count, just so I know what I did there. And so here, what I'll do is I'll use the concatenate operator. I'll select poll first. Concatenate operator is the ampersand. And then I will do an open parenthesis, concatenate again. We'll click the poll count like that. Space, concatenate again. And we will close it off with another parenthesis. And I don't like how that, you see how it says Gallup and 13's touching? I don't like that. Let's give it some space. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Now, what I can do is I can click Insert Slicer over here, and this time we're going to be using the poll count. I know I don't have to do it on the same page, but I always like testing it out just to make sure that what I did makes sense. So I'll hit Control X here. When I say on the same page, I could put the slicer somewhere else starting out. So I'm going to move this over here, And let's do some slicer options, right? Make our life a little easier. Let's give ourselves 2 columns. That seems fair. Make it like this. I don't really care for the slicing header, right? We don't need the header. What do we need headers for? Okay, so we'll hit OK on that. And then I don't really love, let's move this over just a tad. I don't really love the borders and everything. I kind of want to make it a little more seamless, so I'll click on the slicer. Let's see here. We have these slicer options here. Let's click New Slicer Style. And under the whole slicer, under Border, I'm going to just click None. Let's do Color. Make that right. I'm going to make the outline white. That also works too. And then let's see here. Under Hover Selected Item, with data, let's just kind of make that kind of like that. Make it that peach colored, and then selected items. We'll make them kind of harsher, like that. Hit OK, hit OK. So, oh, and then we have to assign it up here. Okay, so I kind of like how this looks. Looks a little bit better. Now once you change the, whenever you change the slicer settings, you have to, there's so many of them that you have to, deal with. So let's say hover selected item with data, but I want to give it a border too. Something like that. And we'll hit OK. Let's modify it one more time. Hover unselected item with no data. I think that's the one I was just thinking of that actually I really wanted to give the border to, but this will work here. So we'll hit OK on that. Okay, so that gives me kind of the effect I like. You can highlight them like that. So there we go. That's how you would build this. And now I think I am ready to add a chart title. So let's add one. So I'll click Format, or no, let's click Chart Design. Add chart element, chart title, above the chart. Polling report ratings, like that. And then just so people understand what's going on, let's move this over just like there. So people understand what's going on, we're going to add a quick chart element. We'll do a legend. We'll do it at the top. Now look, it's got these ones we don't care about on it, right? It's got static, linear, all that. I'm going to move this just like a little bit below. These are called Series 3 and Series 4. So I'm going to right click and hit Select Data, where this is Series 3. I'm going to call that Approve. Series 4, we'll call that Disapprove, like that. And then we can just go ahead, and get rid of the rest of these. We don't care about all of them. I think it's pretty well understood what they're doing. There we go. So if you wanted to make that bigger, which I think I do, you could. And now you have your chart. Isn't that cool? Okay, so when I was doing that during the webinar, I made a lot of, I kept making mistakes in it, and I just had to give up at some point. So I'm glad that that one worked here. All right, so the next thing I want us to do is we're going to check out the Tornado dashboard, another classic Jordan example. I've created this dashboard right here. So these are all my tornadoes totaled for a year based on real data. And then over here, I have this kind of drill down version of it. So how can I build this? We have our tornado backend data right here. You can see it right here. And I have tornado example, which I actually, this is the version I built for them. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete all that's in here. So this is when I say built for them. This was built for the webinar that I was running. So I'll go ahead and just hit delete on all that. Don't worry, we'll get to recreate it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit delete there on that one as well. So here's what we'll do. And there's one last final delete. We're going to hit remove. I just want to show you here on the values, right? So this is pulling from the yearly tornadoes, and this is pulling from the Y values, which is our total tornadoes. So that's showing us all the years and their total values. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create that scroll bar mechanism so I can go to the developer tab. Under this toolbox, we'll click insert, has a form control. I'll draw this over here. And then under the formula bar, check this out, because I'm just have that scroll bar still selected. I can type in equals and I can select the scroll bar value. So I've selected that it went to 0, but if I scroll up, whoa, look at that. That's pretty crazy, right? It goes up and down like that. So now we need to create the selector mechanism that highlights part of this chart. What I can do here is under current X, I'm going to type in equals index like that. We'll go to the tornado data. Here's my backend data, right? So index always takes in a row or a column, and then you tell it what row or column at what area or item you want to pull something back from. So I've highlighted tornado data. I'll click F4 to lock it in. Then I'm going to go back to the example, and I will select the scroll bar value, which is dynamically hooked to the scroll bar. So at row 25, we know we're talking about year 1974. If I take this down to row 3, we're talking about year 1952. So if I want to get the total tornadoes from that, I'll use an index again. And in this case, we're just going to get the parallel series right next to it. So highlight this whole thing. F4 is going to lock it in. And then we'll link this back to the scroll bar value like so. So I'll hit enter. 1952, there were 240 tornadoes. What do we do when we make something like this? Always a good idea to check. Record 3, 1952, 240 tornadoes. So we agree. That looks good. So the next thing we can do here is I'm going to right click here. I'll click select data. And I actually made this type of chart a scatter plot. So what's cool about a scatter plot, right, is that rather than create the series that we did at the start, which was like 0, remember maximum value 0, 0, we had to create something in parallel. With the scatter plot, you only need to create another X and Y point that you want to put on top. So series X, we have that right here, 1952. Series Y, remember we always delete what's in here. And then we'll select current year like that. So we'll call the series name selector. I'll go ahead and hit enter, and you can see that the selector has automatically been placed on here. So the mechanism is kind of working. Let's right click it here and click add data labels. This is going to add the data label to it. I'll click on that, the data label that just showed up. I'll hit right click format data labels. We'll just make this above, and then I just kind of want to make it bold, and I'm going to make the background of it white like that, just so if it's on top of one of these, we can read it. So look, excuse me, because it's connected to a data label, it automatically is going to change that value inside of it. So we don't have to worry about that, right? So that's kind of cool. It takes care of it for us. One of the problems we're going to run into, though, is if I scroll this all the way down to 0, this should not be 1978, 855. I don't even know why it comes back that way. That's just kind of a weird thing Excel does. If I take this up beyond 45 data points, we get a ref error, right? So we don't want that either. I can right-click on this control. I'll go to Format Control. We have our minimum, our maximum. I'm going to make the minimum 1. The maximum in this case, I know there's 45 data points because I've done this example dozens of times. So I'll click 45. I'll click OK. And then you see that this selector lines up pretty well. So if you really wanted it to line up, you could really get it to line up. I would suggest using the snap to grid if you really want to do that. I don't really want to do that in this moment. I'd be lying if I said I'd never done it. That's just kind of how I am. So the next thing we want to do here is we want to build this part here that gives us the drill down, right? So I have some of it already set up. In cell M3, I can type in equals here. If I wanted the year, it's right here in the current X, right? Easy peasy on that one. Next thing I want to set up is the calendar references. So January, Feb, I'll type that in. Scroll that down to where it says December. Okay, so that looks good. And then down here, you see we have the January through December as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in that January through December data. We're going to plot it over here just so we have a place, a transformation place to deal with it. And then we are going to put it on our presentation layer over here. So how are we going to get that data? Well, let's jump back to tornado data here. Before I used index, I could use index again. This time I'm going to use offset. So I'll type in equals offset like that. And offset is always looking for an anchor. So if I click this here, let's say I click C5, I'm just going to lock it in here. I only clicked F4 on that one, or F5. That's why that popped up. So, okay, so we have F4 selected. If I say go down 3, go to the right 3 like that. So you see it says rows and then calls, right? So this is going to tell me how many to offset from. So we get the anchor, we go down 3 rows, move to the right 3 columns. I'll close this parenthesis. You see that comes to 37, okay? So we can start here in C5. It goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 37. So we can just double check that ourselves. The way offset works is positives are always down and to the right, negatives are always up and to the left. Okay, so now that we have that, what I can do here is I can select this whole thing as my anchor. And if I wanted to know how many rows to offset it, well, we have that data. We go to tornado example. That's our scroll bar value right there. I'll hit F4. How many columns do we want to move over? Well, you may think we want to move over 12, right? But actually, if we move over 12, what's going to happen is that this thing is going to start moving this way, right? We actually just want it to move down. So how many columns do we want to move over? The answer to that is 0. Let's delete what's in here. The answer is 0 right there. All right, let's see what's going on with this. So how many rows do we want to go down? Oh, yeah, so this is fine. We do get an error starting out. That is okay because this is an array formula that we're going to create. Sometimes it starts with an error. Remember, the first thing to do is get the formula right. The next thing to do is to stretch it out to the size you need. In this case, I'm just kind of guessing, but it would be out to 12. And then you can just go back in here and hit Control-Shift-Enter, and you'll see it pulls that data. And so I didn't pull it out all the way. Let's go back to tornado example. Let's make, this is at 8. The other cool thing is even though, you can scroll this, I can go back here and just type a 3 and it'll just adjust it. So I've done that. So let's compare it to the third item. So 12, 27, 43, 37, blah, blah, blah. All right, so it takes it all the way to 3, so that pulled back everything we need. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to tornado example over here, and I'm going to literally just rewrite that formula. So it starts with offset. What's our anchor? That's going to be C5 through N5, F4 to lock it in. I'll hit comma. How many rows do we want to go down? Let's jump back here. We're going to click scroll bar value right there. I'm going to lock that one in. And then how many columns we want to offset? The answer is 0. I will take this value error and drag it out. Alternatively, I can just do shift like this. Both of these work. Notice too, it'll bring back regular data when you drag it out. So even though it has an error, sometimes it still works, weirdly. Excel won't create an error there, but the data will not be correct until you do this final step. You'll hit Control-Shift down like that. That's going to pull the data back. Okay, so how do we get this data that's horizontal to be vertical over here? So we're going to actually use a matrix operation called transpose. So I'll type in equals transpose, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to highlight this whole thing right here, F4, hit enter on that. Then I will drag it down to the right size. And you see it says count 12, so we know that we dragged it down the right size. Control-Shift-Enter. There we go. So it pulls back that data. Always a good idea to make sure it works. And we are happy with how it works. Okay, so you'll notice in this last part here, we had these little bar charts. This is an old trick, still relevant today, still one I love to use when I need to build something quickly. So, excuse me, I get animated and I hit the mic. Okay, so here we have the repeat formula, R-E-P-T, right? If I put in the text of a pipe symbol and I repeat that 10 times, you see it's going to be, it looks like a bar chart. If I go up here to the font and I change this to playbill, it actually looks like a nice bar chart, like it flattens. So what we'll do here is we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to type in R-E-P-T. We'll repeat the pipe symbol. If you're wondering where that pipe symbol is, if you look at your keyboard, there's the backslash, and right above that is the pipe symbol. And then we're going to repeat this text a certain number of times. I'm just going to select that data right there and hit enter because I just want to show you something with it. So I'll double click the way down, and you see this is on playbill 10. You know, you can make it smaller if you want. You can make it bigger. Notice, however, though, this is actually bigger than the data that we have, or the room we've given it, right? So what we need to do is scale this whole thing back. We can't use these numbers raw as they are. So What I usually scale this back as in this case is I'm going to divide the entire amount by 3. So click that, double click the way down. And so that usually does a pretty good job. So we've just applied a scalar to it to make it proportionally smaller. Now, why 3? Well, I've done this enough times to know that that number works. You know, you got to try it on your own. There's no art or science behind that. It's just, I guess it's more, I should say it's more art than science. So just something that you need to look at on your own. So that was the second to last example. And then because we didn't have a whole lot of time left on the webinar, what I did is I just kind of riffed on this tornado data. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to click move or copy, create a copy on tornado data like that. And we'll call this spark lines like that there. And then I'm going to just delete all this right here because I don't really care about it. And I'll scroll right. I'm going to hit year value. Okay, so if you've never used sparklines before, what you can do here is I'm going to go to insert, and you see over here there's this group called sparklines. I'm going to click column like that. What's the data range I'm interested in? That's going to be C2 through N2, like that. I'll hit OK, and you see it created just a little mini bar chart, right, based off of this data. What's cool here is I can take this corner and I will drag it all the way down like this. And you see that it did it for all of them. Okay, so that's a cool way to take a look at this data very quickly. I'm going to do a little styling on this. So under my sparkline color, with any of these selected, doesn't matter, you know, where I am in the group. With any of these selected, I can go to sparkline color, and I'll make that kind of a gray like that. And then I'm going to click under this show. You can click high point. Now you can always do the low point. You can do negative points. We'll just do the high point. And under the marker color, where it says high point, I'm going to make that black. I'm going to make it stick out that way. Okay, so what this is telling us is for each of these months, you know, where was that high point? And you might say, oh, this is really interesting. It's kind of tending towards around the center, around July and August. But what we're really getting here is the intramonth comparison, because the axes for all these spark lines are actually the same. So if I click anywhere in here, I go to axis and I click vertical axis maximum value options. I click same for all spark lines. So it's going to make them all the same based off the maximum one. When I click that, what we can see is actually as I scroll down, the values are increasing. So it's not just that the center is the greatest value, but we get a sense of over time how it's increased. Now, which one is right? I'll hit Control Z. I'll hit Control Y again. Which one is right? All depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing an intramonth comparison, this one is the right one to go. If you're trying to understand it over the years, this is the one to go, the right one to go with. Okay, so one last tip. Since we're plotting this data, you don't necessarily need to see it. So what you could do is highlight this whole thing here. You can go to data like that. I can click group. And once I click group, I will close the group. Now watch, the sparkline data is going to disappear. You notice it disappeared. I click in here, it's gone. So what happened to it? I'm going to go to sparkline here. I'm going to click, let's click edit data here. And then we'll click hidden empty cells. I'll click show data and hidden rows and columns like that. And now it's back. So you're showing this to your manager. Hey, look, here's our performance over the years. And they say, well, where's the underlying data? You can go ahead and click that plus button. Boom, there it is. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this visual analytics presentation. I went a little faster, as the case may be, when you just kind of do it not live, but I'm hoping that there's a lot of good stuff in here for you. If you want to download this, go ahead in YouTube. There is the download link is below, and also just make sure to check out all the files in there. We weren't able to cover all of them, and I also threw in some bonus files. Until then, keep on excelling. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you at future working webinars. Thanks, everyone.